The Valdorian Empire had conquered 300 worlds across the galaxy. Their warships were massive and dark, blocking out the sun wherever they appeared. Every civilization they encountered had surrendered. Every species had bent the knee and accepted their fate as servants of the Empire. The Valdorians believed this was simply the natural order of things. The strong ruled and the weak obeyed. It had always been this way, and it would always be this way. So when High Commander Zorath brought his fleet of 2,000 warships to the small blue planet called Earth, he expected nothing different. He had studied these humans briefly. They were a young species, barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships were laughable. By every measure that mattered, they were inferior to the Valdorian Empire in every possible way. Zorath transmitted his demands from his flagship, a vessel nearly 3 miles long that hung in the sky above the Pacific Ocean like a metal mountain. The message was simple. Earth would surrender within 12 hours. All military forces would be disbanded. All governments would be dissolved. Humanity would serve the Empire as a labor class, working in mines and factories across Valdorian space. Those who resisted would be destroyed. Those who obeyed might be allowed to live. Admiral Jack Morrison received the transmission aboard the aircraft carrier USS Defiance. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes, that had seen too many wars. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Garrett, his second in command. She was younger but equally hardened by years of service. They watched the alien ships descend through the clouds, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Lisa read the translated demands aloud, and then looked at her admiral. She asked him what they were going to do. The odds were impossible. 2,000 alien warships against Earth's combined fleet of 300 vessels. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Logic said they should surrender and hope for mercy. Jack stood silent for a long moment. He thought about his daughter Amy, who lived in San Diego with her mother. He thought about all the children on Earth who had never asked for this war. He thought about every moment in human history when surrender would have been the smart choice, but brave men and women had chosen to fight anyway. He thought about the stories his grandfather had told him about the great wars of the past, about soldiers who stood their ground against impossible odds because some things mattered more than survival. He pressed the button that connected him to every ship in Earth's fleet. His voice was calm when he spoke. He told them that the aliens wanted humanity to bow. They wanted humans to break and become slaves. They thought Earth was just another world to conquer and forget, but they did not know humanity. They did not know what humans had survived: ice ages and plagues and world wars and disasters that should have destroyed them. Humanity was still here. Humanity would remain here. He ordered all ships to prepare for combat. They would fight at dawn. The message spread across the planet within minutes. In bunkers and command centers around the world, military leaders received word that humanity had chosen defiance. There would be no surrender. There would be no negotiation. Earth would fight. Defense Secretary Ben Collins stood before an emergency session of the United Nations. He spoke from a secure bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, his face projected on screens in every capital city. He told them they had 10 hours to coordinate the largest defensive operation in human history. Every nation would contribute. Every soldier would fight. Every resource would be used. The Valdorians had made a mistake. They saw a small planet and assumed weakness. They would learn otherwise. In Beijing, General Yang coordinated with military commanders in Moscow and New Delhi. Old rivalries and political tensions melted away in the face of extinction. In London, Prime Minister Claire Ashford ordered the full mobilization of British forces. In Tokyo and Sydney and Cairo and Rio de Janeiro, leaders made the same choice. Humanity would stand together or fall together. Meanwhile, in a secret facility beneath the Nevada desert, a small team of scientists worked frantically on a project that had been in development for nearly a decade. 8 years ago, a small alien probe had crashed in the Australian outback. The technology recovered from that probe had been studied in secret by the world's greatest minds. They had learned things. They had built things. And now they prayed that what they had built would be enough. Dr. Nathan Cole led the team. He was a quiet man with glasses and messy brown hair, who had spent his entire career preparing for a moment he hoped would never come. Now that moment was here. He pushed his team harder than ever before, knowing that the fate of Earth might rest on their work. In orbit above Earth, the Valdorian fleet waited with cold patience. High Commander Zorath sat on his throne and watched the countdown timer. He had given the humans 12 hours to surrender. He expected them to use perhaps 6 before fear overwhelmed their pride. Every species reached that breaking point, the moment when they realized that resistance was not just futile, but foolish. The moment when survival instinct overcame foolish notions of freedom and honor. His second-in-command, Fleet Captain Mirasol, approached with a data tablet. She reported that they were detecting unusual activity across the planet. Military forces were mobilizing rather than standing down. Communication networks were buzzing with encrypted traffic. The humans appeared to be preparing for battle rather than surrender. Zorath almost laughed. He had seen this before. Some species made a show of resistance to satisfy their pride before ultimately submitting. It was a face-saving measure. Nothing more. The humans would realize their mistake soon enough. When morning came and they saw the full power of the Valdorian fleet arrayed against them, they would understand that fighting was pointless. But as the hours passed, no surrender came. No desperate pleas for mercy. No politicians offering terms of submission. Instead, the humans continued their preparations. Ships moved into defensive positions. Aircraft scrambled to bases around the world. Soldiers took their places in bunkers and trenches. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the sun begin to rise over the Pacific. In a few minutes, the deadline would expire. He knew that billions of people would probably die in the coming battle. He knew that Earth might not survive, but he also knew that some things were worth dying for. Freedom was worth dying for. The future of humanity was worth dying for. He looked at Lisa and asked her if she was ready. She nodded and said she was. Then they turned to face the enemy together, waiting for the war to begin. Above them, the Valdorian fleet powered their weapons. High Commander Zorath gave the order to prepare for attack. The humans had made their choice. Now they would suffer the consequences. But deep in his ancient mind, in a place he would never acknowledge, Zorath felt something strange. A tiny flicker of doubt. No species had ever refused to surrender before. Not when the odds were this hopeless. Perhaps these humans were simply stupid. Or perhaps they knew something he did not. He pushed the thought aside and prepared to teach Earth a lesson it would never forget. Dawn broke over the Pacific Ocean, and with it came fire and death. The Valdorians had expected a simple morning of ceremonial surrender. They had prepared speeches and protocols for accepting humanity's submission. Their soldiers had been told they would be walking into cities, not fighting through them. It was supposed to be easy. It was not easy. The first strike came from beneath the waves. Every nuclear submarine in Earth's combined navies had been positioned during the night, hiding in the deepest trenches of the ocean. At exactly 6 a.m, they launched everything they had. Modified missiles carrying electromagnetic pulse warheads screamed upward through the atmosphere. The Valdorians detected them too late. Their forward sensor arrays went dark. 17 cruisers lost power and began drifting helplessly in orbit. High Commander Zorath sat forward on his throne in shock. The primitive species had attacked. They had actually attacked. For a moment he could not process what had happened. In 3 centuries of conquest, no species had ever fired first. No species had ever shown such suicidal courage. Fleet Captain Mirasol reported the damage with a trembling voice. The humans had disabled nearly 20 ships with their opening strike. Their weapons were crude but surprisingly effective against lower shield frequencies. The Valdorians had not expected to need full shields against such a primitive enemy. Zorath ordered full shields raised on all remaining vessels. Then he ordered his fleet to move toward the city called New York. He would burn it to glass as punishment for this insult. The humans would learn what it meant to defy the Empire. The Valdorian fleet moved eastward across the planet, their weapons charging with enough power to vaporize millions of lives in seconds. But they did not reach New York. Something stopped them. Captain Derek Hayes commanded the experimental spacecraft called Artemis from low Earth orbit. The ship was humanity's greatest secret, built over 8 years using technology recovered from the crashed alien probe. It was small compared to Valdorian warships, barely 200 meters long. But it was fast, and it carried a weapon that could hurt even the largest enemy vessel. Derek watched the alien flagship on his screen. The massive ship was moving toward New York, completely focused on the city below. It had not noticed the tiny human vessel approaching from behind. Derek told his pilot, Lieutenant Grace Kim, to bring them in through the debris field. They would use the wreckage of destroyed satellites as cover. Grace was calm as she guided the ship through the chaos of battle. She had trained her entire career for a moment like this. Her hands were steady on the controls as she slipped the Artemis into position behind the flagship. Derek gave the order to fire. The Artemis carried only one main weapon, a concentrated beam of superheated plasma that could burn through almost anything. The beam struck the flagship's engine core with perfect accuracy. The massive ship lurched violently as its main thrusters went offline. It did not explode, but it stopped moving. The attack on New York was delayed. On the surface of Earth, people who had been watching the alien ship approach saw it suddenly halt in the sky. They did not know what had happened, but they felt something they had not felt since the invasion began. Hope, but the victory was short-lived. Valdorian fighters swarmed toward the Artemis like angry insects. Derek knew his ship could not survive against so many enemies. He ordered his crew to abandon ship and head for the escape pods. Most of them made it. Derek stayed behind to make sure the ship's computer transmitted all of its combat data back to Earth before the end. The Artemis died in flames over the Atlantic Ocean. But the information it sent home would prove invaluable to humanity's scientists in the weeks to come. On the ground, the battle was equally fierce. Valdorian troops had landed near major cities around the world, expecting to simply walk in and take control. Instead, they found resistance at every turn. Air Force Colonel Megan Walsh led a squadron of modified fighter jets against landed Valdorian forces near Tokyo. The aliens had underestimated Earth's air power. They had not expected the primitive aircraft to pose any threat. Megan and her pilots proved them wrong by destroying 3 landing craft before retreating into the mountains for refuel and rearm. Her wingman, Lieutenant Tony Ruiz, asked how long they could keep fighting like this. Megan told him they would fight as long as they had to. The aliens wanted an easy conquest. Humans would make them pay for every inch of ground they took. Similar scenes played out across the planet. In the forests of Germany, ground troops ambushed a Valdorian patrol and captured several alien weapons. In the streets of Cairo, civilians armed with nothing but hunting rifles harassed enemy soldiers until military reinforcements arrived. In the mountains of Peru, a small group of villagers collapsed a tunnel on an advancing alien column. Everywhere the Valdorians went, they found resistance. Not organized military resistance, but something worse. Ordinary people who refused to accept their fate. Farmers and teachers and shopkeepers who picked up weapons and fought because they had nothing left to lose. By the end of the first day, humanity had lost 200 million people. Entire cities had been reduced to ash. Coastlines had been vaporized by orbital bombardment. The damage was beyond anything Earth had ever experienced. It was a nightmare, made real. But the Valdorians had lost something too. 63 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled. Thousands of their soldiers lay dead on foreign soil. They had expected to lose nothing. They had expected surrender, and instead received war. High Commander Zorath sat alone in his damaged flagship that night. His engine core had been repaired enough to maintain orbit, but the ship would need months of dock time to fully recover. Around him, reports came in from across the planet. Reports of ambushes and attacks. Reports of soldiers who refused to retreat. Reports of humans who fought until their last breath and then kept fighting. Zorath had conquered 300 worlds. He had broken species far older and wiser than humanity. But he had never seen anything like this. These humans did not fight like a species trying to survive. They fought like a species with nothing to lose. They fought like they would rather die free than live as slaves. For the first time in his 300-year military career, Zorath felt something unfamiliar in his chest. It took him a long time to recognize it because he had never felt it before. The feeling was fear. He looked out the viewport at the small blue planet below and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The war was only 1 day old, and already everything had gone wrong. His fleet was damaged, his soldiers were demoralized, and somewhere down there, 8 billion humans were preparing to fight another day. Zorath ordered his fleet to regroup and prepare for a longer campaign. The quick conquest he had promised his emperor would not happen. This war would take time. This war would cost blood. He did not know it yet, but this war would cost him everything. 3 months passed, and the surface of Earth became a place of horror. The Valdorians controlled the skies completely now. Their warships circled the planet like vultures waiting for something to die. Most major cities had fallen under occupation. Billions of humans lived under alien rule, forced to work in labor camps that fed the Empire's endless hunger for resources. Those who resisted openly were executed. Those who obeyed were allowed to live, though it was barely a life worth living. But the aliens made a mistake that every conqueror eventually makes. They believed that controlling the surface meant controlling everything. They did not think to look beneath the ground. In tunnels and bunkers and forgotten subway systems and abandoned mines, humanity survived. The resistance was everywhere and nowhere. It struck without warning and vanished like smoke. It made the Valdorians afraid to walk alone in the dark. Dr. Nathan Cole led a team of scientists in a converted salt mine beneath Kansas. The mine went 2,000 feet below the surface, deep enough that Valdorian scanners could not detect the activity within. Nathan and his team had been working without rest for weeks, building something that could change everything. He stood before a massive device that filled an entire cavern. Wires and cables and strange components scavenged from captured alien technology covered every surface. It did not look impressive. It looked like a mess of junk thrown together by desperate people, but Nathan knew what it could do. He addressed the resistance leaders through an encrypted video link. Admiral Morrison watched from a mobile command post hidden in the Appalachian Mountains. Other commanders watched from similar hiding places around the world. Nathan explained what they had discovered. The data recovered from the Artemis before its destruction had been invaluable. It showed them exactly how Valdorian shields worked. More importantly, it showed them the shields had a weakness. There was a specific frequency of energy that disrupted the shield generators. If they could broadcast that frequency with enough power, every alien ship in orbit would become vulnerable to conventional weapons. Morrison asked how long until the device was ready. Nathan said 6 weeks. Maybe less if they could get more resources. Morrison promised him everything he needed. Whatever it took, the countdown had begun. Meanwhile, in the ruins of occupied Los Angeles, a young woman named Hannah Price led a cell of 50 resistance fighters through the sewer systems beneath the city. She was only 23 years old. 3 months ago, she had been a college student studying engineering. Then the invasion happened, and her family died in the first bombardment. Her mother and father and little brother had been in their house when an orbital strike turned their neighborhood into a crater. Hannah had survived only because she was at a friend's apartment on the other side of town. Sometimes she wished she had been home with them. But that wish never lasted long. There was too much work to do, too many aliens to kill. She gathered her fighters before a raid on an enemy supply depot. Most of them were ordinary people who had never held a weapon before the invasion. Teachers and mechanics, and students, and retired workers. None of them were soldiers. All of them were warriors now. Hannah told them that the Valdorians thought they had won. The aliens saw humans hiding in the dark and assumed they were defeated. But they were not hiding. They were waiting, and when the moment came, they would show these invaders what free humans could do. The raid was a success. Hannah's cell captured enough alien weapons to arm 3 more resistance groups. They transmitted the captured technology to scientists around the world who studied it and learned its secrets. Across the globe, similar operations happened every night. In Paris, a man named Paul Durant led the French resistance from his restaurant's hidden basement. Before the invasion, he had been a chef. Now he planned ambushes and assassination missions. He had lost his wife and daughter to the occupation. He had nothing left but revenge, and the hope that someday France would be free again. In Mumbai, a software engineer named Priya Sharma fought a different kind of war. She had learned to hack into Valdorian communication networks. Every day she fed false information to the enemy, leading their patrols into ambushes and away from resistance hideouts. The aliens never caught her because they could not imagine that a human could understand their technology. Their arrogance was their weakness. The occupation continued, but it was not the peaceful submission the Valdorians had expected. Every day brought new reports of sabotage and attacks. Supply convoys were destroyed. Isolated patrols disappeared and were never found. Collaborators who worked with the aliens were executed by resistance fighters. High Commander Zoreth grew increasingly frustrated. His officers urged him to simply destroy the planet with a massive bombardment and move on to easier targets. But Zoreth's pride would not allow it. No species had ever defied the Empire. He would not be the commander who failed to conquer a primitive world. He ordered his soldiers to crack down harder on the population. He authorized mass executions and collective punishment. He thought that enough brutality would break humanity's spirit. He was wrong. The brutality only made the resistance stronger. Every atrocity created more fighters. Every execution created more people with nothing left to lose. The Valdorians could not understand this. In their experience, terror always worked. Crush enough bodies and the survivors would submit. But humans did not submit. They just got angrier. Valdorian soldiers began to fear assignments on Earth's surface. The planet had earned a reputation throughout the fleet. It was a cursed world where death waited in every shadow. Some soldiers refused orders to patrol certain areas. Others requested transfers to different campaigns. The mighty warriors of the Empire had become afraid of humans. In the salt mine beneath Kansas, Dr. Nathan Cole counted down the days. The device was almost ready. Soon they would strike back. Soon the Valdorians would learn what a terrible mistake they had made by coming to Earth. Admiral Morrison received reports every day from resistance cells around the world. He coordinated attacks and gathered intelligence. He made sure the enemy never had a moment of peace, and he waited for Nathan's weapon to be completed. The deadline was approaching. 6 weeks had almost passed. The final battle was coming. Everyone on both sides could feel it. Something was about to break. Hannah Price stood in the darkness beneath Los Angeles and looked up toward the surface. Somewhere above her, alien soldiers walked through the ruins of her city. Somewhere above her, the enemy thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. 6 weeks passed, and humanity was finally ready for the final battle. The device that Dr. Nathan Cole and his team had built now sat in a heavily fortified bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. They had chosen this location because the mountains provided natural protection against orbital bombardment. The rock was thick enough to absorb even direct hits from Valdorian weapons. Getting the device here had required the largest covert operation in human history, moving components across occupied territory through underground tunnels and hidden convoys. Many people died to make it happen. Their sacrifice would not be wasted, but the Valdorians had learned of the weapon. A captured resistance fighter had broken under torture and revealed what he knew. High Commander Zoreth did not understand exactly what the humans were building, but he understood it was dangerous. He made a decision that would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. He would lead the assault personally. The Valdorian fleet descended on Europe like a storm of metal and fire. 200 warships and 50,000 ground troops moved toward the Swiss Alps with one goal: destroy whatever the humans had built before it could be used. Admiral Morrison had expected this. He had gathered every remaining military asset Earth possessed for a final defensive stand. Soldiers from every nation on the planet converged on Switzerland. Aircraft from 30 countries flew toward the battle zone. Naval vessels launched their remaining missiles from oceans thousands of miles away. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. Morrison addressed his commanders from a bunker beneath Geneva. His voice was calm, but his message was clear. If the enemy reached the device, humanity was finished. They would hold the line here, or they would die trying. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. There was only victory or extinction. Colonel Megan Walsh had been promoted to general after months of successful operations against the occupation. Now she led a combined air force of pilots from every nation that still had working aircraft. They rose to meet the Valdorian fighters above the mountains, knowing they were outnumbered by at least 10-1. Megan transmitted a final message to her pilots before the battle. She told them to remember what they were fighting for, not just victory, but the future. Their grandchildren's future. Every moment of freedom that humanity might ever experience depended on what they did today. The battle began with fire and thunder that shook the mountains themselves. Valdorian warships pounded the defensive positions with orbital strikes. Human artillery answered with everything it had. The sky turned red with explosions. The ground trembled with the impact of falling ships. Ground forces clashed in the valleys and passes. Tanks that had survived 3 months of occupation rolled forward to meet alien vehicles. Infantry took positions in bunkers and trenches, firing at enemies they could barely see through the smoke and chaos. Soldiers died by the thousands on both sides. In the bunker beneath the Alps, Dr. Nathan Cole monitored the battle on flickering screens while making final adjustments to the device. His hands trembled, but his mind was clear. Years of work had led to this moment. Everything depended on him now. His assistant, Beth Santos, watched the screens, showing enemy forces advancing toward their position. She was young and scared, but she refused to show it. She told Nathan that she would buy him more time. Then she picked up a rifle and headed toward the bunker entrance to join the defenders. Nathan wanted to stop her. He wanted to tell her to stay safe, but he knew there was no safe place left. He just nodded and returned to his work. Above ground, the tide of battle turned against humanity. Valdorian forces were too numerous and too powerful. They breached the outer defensive lines and pushed deeper into the mountains. Morrison ordered a fighting retreat, trading ground for time. Every minute they delayed the enemy was another minute for Nathan to complete his work. Hannah Price had traveled from Los Angeles to join the final battle. Her resistance cell had made the journey across occupied territory, losing half their number along the way. Now she fought in the trenches alongside professional soldiers, her captured alien weapons spitting fire at advancing enemies. She found herself face to face with a Valdorian officer twice her size. The alien raised his weapon, but Hannah was faster. She shot him between the eyes before he could fire. His massive body collapsed at her feet. "Humans do not bow," she whispered as she stepped over him and kept fighting. In the skies above, General Walsh's fighter took a direct hit from an enemy missile. Her aircraft began to spiral toward the mountains, trailing smoke and fire. Her controls were dead. Her ejection system had failed. She had perhaps 30 seconds to live. She looked down and saw a Valdorian troop transport directly below her. It was carrying hundreds of soldiers toward the front lines. Megan made her final decision. She aimed her crippled jet at the transport and held the stick steady as she fell. The collision destroyed both vessels in a ball of flame. Megan Walsh died instantly. So did 300 enemy soldiers. Her sacrifice inspired the remaining pilots to fight even harder. The battle raged for hours. The defenders were pushed back again and again. Enemy forces reached the bunker entrance and began fighting their way inside. Beth Santos died defending the corridor that led to the device, taking 4 aliens with her. Nathan heard the gunfire getting closer. He had perhaps minutes left before the enemy broke through. His hands moved faster than they had ever moved before, making the final connections and adjustments. The device was ready. He activated it. A pulse of invisible energy rippled outward from the bunker, passing through rock and air and space itself. It spread across the globe in seconds, and then continued upward into orbit. Every Valdorian ship in range felt the effects immediately. Their shields flickered once, and then died completely. Their advanced weapons systems went offline. Their targeting computers crashed. The technological giants of the galaxy were suddenly defenseless. Humanity had been waiting for exactly this moment. Hidden missile batteries that had been saved for months, launched from bunkers on every continent. Submarines surfaced in every ocean and fired their remaining nuclear weapons. Aircraft that had been hiding in mountain hangars rose to deliver their strikes. The Valdorian fleet found itself under attack from every direction with no way to defend itself. High Commander Zorath watched in horror as his warships exploded one by one around him. His flagship shook with impact after impact as human missiles found their mark. He tried to raise shields, but nothing worked. He tried to fire his weapons, but the systems were dead. In his final moments, Zoreth understood the truth. He had conquered 300 worlds because those species valued survival over freedom. They calculated the odds and chose to submit. Humans did not calculate. Humans simply refused to lose. The flagship took one final hit and split apart. High Commander Zoreth died in the flames, still unable to comprehend how a primitive species had destroyed him. The battle was over. Humanity had won. The war did not end in a single day. Scattered Valdorian forces remained across the planet, cut off from their fleet and desperate to survive. It took another year of hard fighting to hunt them down. Every city that had been occupied needed to be liberated. Every labor camp needed to be freed. Every collaborator needed to face justice. The work was long and bloody and exhausting, but humanity did it. Step by step and day by day, Earth was reclaimed. The cost had been beyond imagination. 8 billion people had died during the invasion and occupation. Nearly half of the human race had been wiped out in less than 2 years. Cities that had stood for centuries were nothing but ash and rubble. Entire ecosystems had been destroyed by orbital bombardment. The scars would take generations to heal, yet humanity survived. And more than that, humanity had won. A young species that had barely reached its own moon had defeated one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The word spread across the stars faster than any ship could travel. Earth had done what no one thought possible. Admiral Jack Morrison stood at the podium of a newly rebuilt United Nations headquarters in Geneva, exactly 2 years after the invasion had begun. The original building had been destroyed during the occupation. The new one had been constructed in just 6 months by workers from every nation, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it worked together. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from every country on Earth. But there were also other faces in the crowd. Faces that did not look human at all. Delegations from 47 alien species had traveled across the galaxy to attend this ceremony. Some of them had been conquered by the Valdorians centuries ago and had lived under their rule ever since. Some had been hiding from the Empire for generations. All of them had come to see the species that had done the impossible. Morrison looked out at the assembly and began to speak. His voice was older now, worn by 2 years of constant war. But it was still strong. He told them that when the Valdorians demanded Earth bow, they made an assumption that had served them well for 300 conquests. They assumed that humanity would calculate the odds and recognize their hopeless position. They assumed that humans would submit to preserve what they could. Every other species had done this. Every other species had looked at the numbers and made the rational choice. But humans did not fight because they thought they could win. Humans fought because some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Freedom was worth fighting for. Family was worth fighting for. The right to determine their own destiny was worth fighting for. These things were not negotiable. Not for any price. Not against any enemy. Morrison paused and looked at the alien delegations. Some of them were weeping, though their tears looked nothing like human tears. Some sat in stunned silence. He continued speaking. He said that Earth now joined the galactic community not as a conquered servant but as a free nation. And humanity made a promise to every species present. If tyranny ever threatened them, if empires ever demanded their surrender, they would not face the darkness alone. Humanity remembered what it meant to stand against impossible odds. Humanity would stand with them. The assembly hall erupted in applause. Human voices mixed with alien sounds that no human had ever heard before. It sounded almost like hope. In the audience, Hannah Price sat between Dr. Nathan Cole and Beth Santos. Beth had survived her wounds at the bunker, though she walked with a cane now and always would. They had become symbols of the resistance, the soldier, the scientist, and the engineer who helped save the world. News outlets called Hannah the Lion of Los Angeles. She hated the nickname, but she understood why people needed heroes. Later that evening, Hannah stood on a balcony overlooking the city of Geneva. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and red. Below her, the city was still being rebuilt. Cranes and construction vehicles worked around the clock. The sounds of hammers and drills filled the air even at this late hour. Humanity was in a hurry to rebuild what had been lost. Nathan joined her on the balcony and handed her a cup of coffee. He said the news networks were calling her a hero again. Hannah laughed softly at that. She said she was just a scared kid who did not want to die on her knees. There was nothing heroic about it. Nathan disagreed. He said that was exactly what made her dangerous. That was what made all of them dangerous. The Valdorians had better weapons and better ships and better everything. But they could not manufacture what humans had. Hannah asked what that was. Stubbornness, Nathan said with a tired smile. Sheer, unreasonable, magnificent human stubbornness. Humans refused to accept reality, so they changed it instead. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, remnants of the Valdorian Empire were regrouping. Other empires were watching Earth with new interest. Some were curious, some were afraid, some were already making plans. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and humanity had just announced its presence in the most dramatic way possible. But for now, on this quiet evening, it was enough to simply breathe free air. Hannah raised her coffee cup toward the stars. She made a toast to the ones they had lost. Her family, her friends, Beth's comrades at the bunker, General Walsh and Captain Hayes and all the millions who had died fighting. They would never be forgotten. Nathan raised his cup as well. He added a toast to the ones who would never bow. They drank together as night fell over a healing world. In the months and years that followed, humanity took its place among the stars. The technology captured from the Valdorians allowed them to build their own fleet of starships. The alliances formed with other species created a coalition that no empire could easily threaten. Earth became known throughout the galaxy as the world that refused to break. Young aliens grew up hearing stories about the humans who had defeated High Commander Zorath. They learned about Admiral Morrison and General Walsh, and Hannah Price, and Dr. Cole. They learned about a species that measured victory not by survival but by freedom. Some species feared humanity. They worried that a race so willing to fight might eventually become conquerors themselves. But those fears proved unfounded. Humans did not want to rule the galaxy. They just wanted to be left alone to determine their own fate. And they wanted to help others do the same. The Valdorian Empire demanded that Earth bow. Instead, Earth showed the galaxy something it had never seen before. A species that would burn alongside its enemies, rather than surrender its soul. A species that found strength in the face of extinction. A species that simply refused to accept defeat, and the universe would never forget it. The stars had witnessed many things in their long existence. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had seen civilizations bloom and die. But they had never seen anything quite like humanity. Perhaps they never would again.